Our next guest has been a lawyer, Democratic strategist, and now she's the creator and host of the popular podcast, She Pivots. Emily Tisch Sussman talks to women, including Vice President Kamala Harris and ballerina Misty Copeland, about their pivot points. That's a moment in their lives when they were forced or decided to make a huge change. The award-winning podcast is launching its third season next week. Here's part of our conversation with Misty Copeland.
There's so much more there that I'm never going to be that dancer I was before that injury. I'm never going to be that woman I was before I had a baby, but we should be evolving. We should be continuing to pivot throughout our lives. That's how we continue to evolve as a society. And so I think it's so important that we're always thinking about how we can continue to grow and be better than who we used to be, and also inspire the next generation to be better than we are.
Yes, yes, yes. Emily Tisch Sussman joins us now. Emily, good morning. This podcast speaks to me. I think it speaks to a lot of women and probably men, too. Why did you want to start this?
I mean, it really came out of the fact that I needed advice. I spent my whole career as a political strategist. I was working in Washington on federal policy, and I was doing well. Like, I had accomplished all the things that I had hoped to accomplish in my professional career, or at least was getting towards them.
Right.
And then I had 3 kids in 3.5 years, and let me tell you, that is a career killer. Like, I had designed my job to be 24/7, to be on all the time, and part of why I was good at it is I came at it with a high intensity, and I just didn't have that bandwidth. Like, it didn't exist for me.
Yeah.
And so I felt like all of my metrics for success had suddenly changed. I couldn't, my metric for success was unavailable in my career, and nothing that was out there in the world really spoke to me. Like, all of the cultural conversation, all the writing was about balancing work life.
Yeah.
Which implied that you were choosing this, and I really didn't feel like I chose it.
Yeah.
And so I needed inspiration, and I thought, well, how do I get advice from the women I look up to the most? Put them on a podcast.
Yeah.
That's
Smart
super
advice.
interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so Misty Copeland, we just heard a little bit of that conversation with her. She was worried she wouldn't be able to dance again because of an injury. What did you learn from her recovery?
She had so many bumps along the way that I really didn't know. I think that part of her story, which I think can apply to a lot of our guests, is that you look at them and you think, oh, well, of course they're successful. Of course, they're so incredible right now that everything they've done must have built them to this point. But she didn't always know she was going to be a success, particularly if your job is based on your physical ability, and that is pulled out from under you. We think about these people, dancers, athletes, where their entire profession is based on something they may not have any control over, and they've never prepared for anything else. That's a scary moment for them. So the fact that it took her a year to recover was something I didn't know before we started looking into her background.
I mean, career pivoting is not unique to women. I myself did it when I was 40 years old, but you mostly talk to women on this podcast. I'm intrigued by what your assessment is when we stop being like our parents and grandparents. In other words, you have one job for the rest of your life and then you retire. There are people now who have multiple pivots in their life. When did that start?
Pivoting used to be called quitting.
Yeah. So now it's pivoting.
Yeah, well, that we're reframing. We're going to reframe that right now. Look, I think we live longer. I think we're young longer. I think we're enthusiastic longer. And I think we're also acknowledging that we have different phases of our lives. Our lives are not all one direction. We have different contexts to our lives. And our success gets redefined. It gets redefined for ourselves. In that era, our parents' era of having one job, sticking with it the whole time, they weren't as acknowledging that the conditions around them changed, whether it's having kids, whether it's having to move, whether it's climate change may force them to move. Like, all of these different things are reasons. And so they have to be able to define success for themselves in that moment. I don't think that was really considered for our parents' generation. But for our generation, we're thinking about it much more.
Do you think that you found a common trait in the women that you spoke with where this is the moment where they knew they had to make a pivot, or something that forced the pivot? Because you can live in a bad moment for a while if needed.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's really important to me, I'd say most important to me when I look at the season as a whole and the guests that we're booking, is to make sure that we have the largest variety we possibly can in what that pivot point was. I call that like the intervening life event. Because we want to be able to show, look, my story is in some ways the most common, that I had kids and it changed my life, and so I changed my career. But I wanted to be able to demonstrate through personal storytelling that that's not the one thing that throws people off track. And we have that through our season. So, we have Holocaust survivors. We have women who came out as trans. We have women who had divorce because of chronic illness. Like, it's all these different things that can, something outside of yourself that can change your life and then therefore change your trajectory. I'd say the biggest commonality I find is that in that dark moment, they didn't know they were going to be a success.
But you will.
You will.
You will.
And so I think that's important to really tease out in the interviews.
In the darkness comes the light.
It will come.
It's a great podcast. Can't wait for the next season now that I've been turned on to it. Emily, thank you so much for joining us. And season 3 of She Pivots premieres Wednesday. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.